Well, welcome everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. And it happens to be National Ferris Wheel Day. Why they picked February, but that's what it is. We have another session of the 17th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment virtual conference. I'm Bob Ailes. I'm your moderator. We are fortunate to have with us once again Thomas Tobin from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is a prolific author and speaker on quality and technology mediated education and a wide variety of elements of that. And we are fortunate to have him back for like the 50th time. He's going to talk about three fabulous design and teaching ideas that take work off your plate. That sounds like a great idea. Tom, all yours.
Thank you very much, Bob, and thank you to everybody who's going to be here on the live session, and for those of you who will be watching the recording later on. I want to say welcome to the session. My name is Tom Tobin. I'm a white man with gray hair, glasses, and a giant black mustache. And as Bob mentioned, today is February the 14th. It's Valentine's Day. So I'm also wearing a shirt with lots of little tiny roses in red and pink all over it. Likewise, you see a title slide on your screen, and there's that bunch of roses pattern in the background. And the title for us today, Three Fabulous Design and Teaching Ideas That Take Work Off Your Plate. There's also an image of an instructor on a ladder reaching down to give a hand to a student who's wearing a backpack and also climbing the ladder. There's a number of different ways for everyone to be in the session today. So I would encourage you to have your cameras on or off. If you're not speaking, please have your microphone turned off, but you do have control of that mic. And I'll promise I am interruptible today. If something we're talking about sparks an idea or a comment, put it into the chat feature or raise the hand in Zoom and you can come on the live microphone and be part of the conversation today. And we'll also today start with a few familiar things that a lot of you may have seen me talk about earlier, and then we'll build on those in order to bring in new ideas and techniques. So let's get started with some of those familiar things. Now, on your screen is an image from the 1923 silent film Safety Last, where the star Harold Lloyd is dangling from the face of a rapidly disintegrating clock high above the street. Now, as you're looking ahead to being back in the classroom or doing educational design, what's your biggest concern about the interactions that you'll have with your students? I'll put 2 minutes of music on just to hold some space for thinking. And you can lurk, so think your own thoughts just to yourself. You can talk with a neighbor in the chat feature or write some notes to share once the music is finished. I'll note in the chat when the music is going to end, so if you wanted to mute the audio and think quietly, you can do that too. But here's 2 minutes of music. What's your biggest concern? And I'm going to type that into the chat about teaching and learning. And let's get that music going as well. Here's 2 minutes of music just for thinking. All right. 2 minutes of music goes by pretty quick when you're thinking and doing. And I see a couple of people have posted some things into the chat, and we'll get to those in just a moment. Is there anybody who wanted to unmute the microphone and share an idea or a concern? Fun trivia fact, most people, when they say, "Are there any questions in an educational setting?" wait an average of about 7 seconds before they say, "Oh, great, you all understand. I'll continue with the lecture." So I wanted to make sure that people had at least an opportunity to come onto the microphone. Let's take a look at what people are saying in the chat. Carolyn says, "I want students to want to be there, to have them find value. I want to connect with them, and I want to be there as well." And so I want to course correct when those goals haven't been met in the past. Well spoken. And we'll talk a little bit about engagement techniques as we go through our hour today. Knox is saying that just the sheer volume of email, even among three co-instructors, we have 2,800 students in a course. And so if even only a few percentages of students send email, multiply that by a lot. So how do we keep up with the deluge of communication? Excellent idea. Bob Hales says, having enough time to do everything I want to do and still have a life. This is a message from the one individual person who's been running this whole conference for 2 solid weeks. So y'all, if you're using the React part of Zoom here, give Bob Hales a little bit of love, some applause, some hearts, some something in the reaction there as well. And we've got a couple other ideas coming through here in the chat. Let's see. Carol says, amen to that, Bob. There's so much. Let's see. And Nicole says, from our GU group, time management, finding the balance of being effective but not overburdened. So here's one of the challenges, right? As academics, and even those of us like Carol who have worked in industry, I count myself in that group, we're really good at adding things to people's workloads. We are excellent at creating a new initiative or a new project, and we seldom step back to think about, well, what could we stop doing? Or what should we temporarily put on the shelf and not do for a moment so that we can spend our time and our effort and our attention on something else that is important to us. So if we're thinking about how do we take work off our plates, we'll address some of these things that you've shared in the chat. And I hope we'll address some of the things that you're thinking about as well if you're taking me up on my offer of just lurking today. So now on your screen is a familiar image to many of you. If you've seen me present on Universal Design for Learning, you know that UDL is a framework through which I approach an awful lot of structural and systemic change processes. So on the screen is an image of students studying together in a classroom. One student has hands on the keyboard, everybody's got a laptop or a mobile device, and one student is pointing to an off-camera screen where they're projecting a computer. So many of you are familiar with the principles of Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. The neuroscientists at CAST discovered that when we learn anything, whether we're 6 years old or 60 years old, we have to activate 3 different chemical pathways in our brains, and those pathways correspond roughly to 3 phases of the learning process. But humans don't learn effectively in the same ways all the time. The scientists at CAST discovered that having more than one way to get engaged with and stick with learning tasks, more than one way to take in information and ideas, and more than one way to practice and demonstrate knowledge. All of these multiples help learning to stick better for learners in a wide variety of circumstances. So when we say universal design for learning, this is what we mean. Design multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. Now, a simpler way to approach the principles of UDL, however, is to adopt +1 thinking. So the screen image is the same, but in addition to those definitions of UDL, there's also +1 now. So if there's one way for an interaction to happen now, between learners and content. That's where everybody usually starts, but between learners and other learners, with instructors, with support staffers, or with the community, make just one more way for that to take place. While this approach doesn't cover every possibility, it ensures that there's at least one alternative path for people to choose. It's that choice that supports the positive outcomes. Fewer people have to ask for special treatment, and you get fewer emails because people will find a welcoming path built in. And for those learners who do still need one change, one time for one person, the existence of plus one choices is a supportive signal to them for their conversations with us. And one thing we can all agree on is the increasing diversity among our learners. There are still residential 18-year-old freshman students, and they are now joined by 2-year college transfer students, post-career returning learners, and folks with long commutes to campus in cars, buses, and trains. Regardless of where our students live, the biggest predictor of their success, with far more effect than the quality of our teaching, is their cultural background or the types of support services that we offer. It's time. Students who are able to make time for study, preparation, homework, and practice beyond the formal spaces and times that we have with them, these are the people who are best able to stick with us. And the difference between stopping into office hours and stopping out of college or university altogether can be as little as 20 minutes a day. So what I'd like to suggest is reframing our thinking about how to keep our students engaged. Think about where they are when they are on their own, away from those formal places and times. Now, I'll be at the food truck getting lunch just off campus, like the ones on your screen, being visited by hungry learners here. And when I talk about accessibility these days, I'm talking about barriers way beyond our ability profiles. So when I'm thinking about those kinds of barriers, I chop the end of the word accessibility off. And I talk now just about access broadly. On the screen, it's rush hour on the Schuylkill Expressway in Philadelphia, with cars, trucks, and buses crawling slowly along the packed highway. Where and when do your learners have time in their busy days where they could be preparing, studying, or reviewing? Is it when they're on the bus? Is it when they're driving their kids to school and then they have to go to work and they have to drive back home and then drive to campus to take a night class with you? Or are they in the residence halls and it's when they're doing their laundry that they might be able to bring their study materials with them? So here's the take the work off your plate part of our conversation for today. On your screen now is a photo of college students at a study table in a student center. Prominently on display, laptops, notebooks, mobile phones, and books. Mobile data service is a must as people are traveling to and from campus, and learners need reliable Wi-Fi too, whether they are on campus, across town, or they're truly remote. Now, UDL is a great idea, but when we're already feeling burned out and overwhelmed, it can seem like 20 new things to add to our workload. Remember, we're really good at adding work. Today, let's focus on how to apply inclusive design practices in ways where our effort actually takes work off our plates. If you engage in a small action in each of the 3 areas listed on your screen, access, assessment, and engagement, you're likely to see smoother and easier interactions with your learners and less work for you as well. Each of the following best practices follows the guiding principle of simplifying our focus in order to honor the circumstances under which our students are learning with us. In plain English, we've got 510 things we're supposed to be doing. What I'd like to help us do is set most of those to the side and focus on just 3 things, at least for now. And once we're able to save a little bit of time and effort with these, then put those other good things back on our attention. So the first one here, it's likely you have in past semesters made some accommodations for students with disability barriers in their environments. Alternative versions of readings or course materials, allowing for sign language or transcription helpers to come into the classroom. Well, now everybody has barriers to access. time and technology, especially outside of our formal classroom and lab interactions. So think about how you can set your students up for getting access to course materials. So post content in your learning management system. In the top left corner of the screen is a login for an LMS. But put it there, or put content in your media hosting services, in Google Docs, in your Microsoft SharePoint, anywhere that students can get it. Provide more than one format. You can still use the Ally tool so students don't have to have specialized software on their devices to get access. And we've got one another as well. So in the top right, there's an image of a Zoom call with people coming in and having a conversation. And just make at least one space where students can talk with you and with each other. Bonus points if you're setting up one open-ended water cooler or course lounge space that's dedicated to anything but course-related talk, and then some more structured spaces where you tell students exactly how you'd like them to engage or collaborate. Oh, and ditch the post once, reply twice stuff. That's just bean counting. I also see that there's a couple of questions coming up in the chat, and they're a little bit to the side of what we're going to talk about today. So if you don't mind, we'll hold those for later. And if we have some time, I'm happy to engage with a couple of those. When we're thinking about access, down in the bottom left-hand corner is an image of, yep, an instructor at home with a laptop open, grading on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. But how do you give your students access to you? Knox was asking about this because he's co-teaching a course with literally a couple thousand students in it. Um, Here's a dangerous but really useful response to that question. Offer a 10-minute one-to-one phone call with your students who would like one, just to say hello and check in. And if you've got hundreds or even thousands of students, say if your last name begins with A through G, this is your week. If your last name begins with H through M, this is your week, and so on and so on. And break it down so that you're not necessarily talking to hundreds of students at a time in a week. Most of the emails that you get with the same question over and over and over again, those quick phone calls can clear up what, 7 different back and forth emails would do. And after the first week, ask if people want those calls, and then ask again before a big due date in your course. If you don't want your students to have your number, use a service like remind.com, or set up a different voice number like with a service from Google or something along those lines. And when you're thinking about lowering barriers for access, the last access is access to the community. In the bottom right-hand corner of the screen is a student who's talking with someone in industry on a Zoom call on a laptop. It sounds counterintuitive, but the more you can get students away from their computers and devices, the more engaged they're likely to be. Get them connecting with colleagues in your field, people in your community who work with your concepts. Get students working on real projects and real problems. The less your course is a self-contained box, the better. Now, one best practice that we should bring forward from our emergency remote instruction days back during the pandemic is to reframe assessment like you see on your screen now, and not with remote proctoring or browser lockout software or plagiarism scanning software. There is really only one thing that actually works: lowering student anxiety and pressure. I'm here to tell you, students are not out there cheating any more than they did before, although one thing that could increase dishonest conduct is putting students into a bind where they get tempted, like saying this is due by midnight or you earn a 0, things like that. Put plainly, students are most tempted to act dishonestly when they feel anxiety and pressure, and it's often in response to requirements that we set. So most people don't act on those temptations regularly, but we all have our tipping points. Now, the current shift to, locking things down, that can create anxiety and pressure. The best thing we can all do, regardless of the subject we teach or support, is offer students options, voices, and choices. So in the top left corner, there's a woman who's got her hands in her hair in a gesture of frustration, and her face has been replaced by the face of a clock. So lower time pressure. Don't put time limits in your online or take-home activities that support your face-to-face instruction, including exams. So if it usually takes people 2 hours, okay, fine. Tell your students that, and then take a look and see how long your students actually do take. The student who whips through something in 15 minutes that should have taken 2 hours, you want to have a chat with that person. And the person who's struggling and can't finish it within the 2 hours, you want to have a completely different kind of conversation with them. And Knox is putting a suggestion in here. He says what we've been doing for a few years is keep open a Zoom meeting as drop-in anytime office hours. That's awesome. He says, given that there are three of us, at least one of us can cover sections of the time between morning and late evening in the United States. And of course, students can also make appointments. We'll actually get to a real time saver with regard to office hours as well. And Knox says, so they might email us, but our response is often, hey, can you get on a live Zoom call now? Well done. When we're thinking about assessment here in the top right-hand corner, lower due date pressure. There's a calendar with a red marker on it, and there's a due date circled on the calendar. Allow late submissions, even if you lower the grade for such things. Now, I don't lower the grade, but you do what you want. But having a deadline, and it's a hard deadline, and you get a 0, or you're not allowed to turn it in after that time, what you're asking for is cheating, because students will figure out that if they turn in something, it's better than nothing. And you will get a whole bunch of something rather than their best work. It's almost always better to ask your learners to give you something that is well considered and maybe took them a little while longer. Carolyn, I see you've got your hand raised. Would you like to come on to the conversation?
I would love to. Thank you so much. Here, I'm gonna turn this on also. Sorry, I look a little crazy. It's remote day Friday, but so I 100% agree with this, and I love it. I teach a Psych 101 class, and I am the same way. I'm like, I don't want you to be stressed out. I don't want you to have anxiety about tests or anything. So I'm very lenient with my policy. And what I found at the end of the year, and I had a really rough semester, really negative comments from the students because there wasn't enough structure, because they're not used to that. They're like, you didn't have any due dates. And so my question is, how do you like front load that expectation that there's not as much expectation as they're used to? Like, how do you have that conversation? What do you say to them? Because they did not like it.
I thank you for sharing the story, because we are, all of us as designers and instructors, trying to navigate a path between super strict and you must, and super lenient and just trusting students, when a lot of them really do need some structure, some guidance, some kick in the slats every now and then, right? So, folks who aren't Carolyn on the live call, I could totally have like paid her to ask this question at this moment, because that's the next two things on your screen. So hang on, because we're going to talk a little bit about lowering grade anxiety. One of the things we can do, down in the lower left-hand corner, there's a bubble sheet where it's been filled in with pencil, and there's a big red circled F on it. Spread out the points across your activities and avoid having one big thing carry enough points to possibly wreck a final grade. That's one. So you can consider things like minimalist grading or specifications grading or ungrading. And I've got some links in the handout to this session to theorists and good people who are writing about those practices. And to Carolyn, to answer your question a little more specifically, we have the hand up to the ear down there in the lower right-hand corner. This is the thing that moves your students from, hey, I need some structure, but not too much, right? So lower their communication anxiety. Explicitly tell your students that you're open to hearing about the challenges that they're facing. Give them multiple ways for making contact if things don't go as you or they have planned, and actually say that you're willing to accept late work, offer extensions, think of accepting revised work, whatever you're comfortable doing. Say that out loud so students don't feel that you're unapproachable and they have no choice but to make the grade any way they can. And as a bonus, Carolyn and all of us can adopt what's called best by due dates. What I tell my students is, this is the due date. It's due on February the 14th of 2025. And if you get it to me before the end of the day on February the 14th, that allows me enough time to give you a considered response and gives you enough time to take advantage of our communication about your progress so that you can continue scaffolding up and learning new things. Now, that's a best by due date. If you get it to me later, I'll still give you a good and considered response. But know that that means that we're still moving ahead with the other stuff in the class, and you're probably going to have to work hard to catch up. Does that mean that some people will turn things in super, super late or say, oh, there was no structure? You're not going to be able to get rid of that feedback entirely. At the same time, having those best by due dates, hey, if you want good feedback quick, get it to me by this date. And then it becomes part of a social contract. Then it becomes, you do this so I can help you. And that creates better motivation and probably better student ratings at the end of the term. So awesome question, and thank you. Awesome, awesome. Now, we talked about assessment here, and we talked a little bit about access. And the third one is engagement. Engagement could easily have been first on this list, right? Our students can get the sense that they don't need to come to the classroom, or even worse, that they don't belong there once they're there for overt and for unintended reasons. Perhaps all of the examples we provide involve middle-class white people, or we don't use language that includes our students. Many of our learners don't yet have models for how to respond when we challenge their assumptions and their ideas, or they don't feel safe in our conversations. Now, before you think, buck up, buttercup, college is where you learn how the real world works, or we can't cater to every snowflake, poor us category. Now, these are both things that I've heard from colleagues. But there's a business continuation reason to adopt inclusive practices. So if you're in a state where words like diversity and inclusion don't say those kinds of things, talk about freedoms, talk about the rights of citizens to get an education and access to that education in a way that they feel like they belong there. And suddenly you're talking in language that is different from how we ordinarily would frame diversity and equity and inclusion. And we're also talking about goals that we all agree are good ones. And Knox is talking about due dates, so we'll back up with him in the chat here. He says, similarly, we don't hold strict due dates. This is partly due to the fact that ours is often a class students try to pick up if they had to drop something else midway through a term. I list them as aim to complete this by this date, more in the sense of suggesting they not let things pile up near the end of the experience. So fantastic on that. And that actually is a nice little segue into engagement, right? The students who have a sense of belonging, they feel like they have a choice in how they move through their learning experiences, a voice in their class, safety, control over their circumstances. Those students are more than twice as likely to persist, be retained, and recommend our institutions to their friends. They also tend to give us better student ratings at the end. So as you're looking at the interactions that you'll design for your students, think about taking work off your plate in inclusive ways. So there's 4 ideas here on the screen. Excuse me. Practice is in the upper left, and here are some students in a lab wearing white coats, and there's all kinds of equations written on the board. If you wonder why even students who live in the residence halls aren't coming to class meetings, or they're showing up underprepared, it's most likely because they feel they don't need the real-time parts of our courses. Our colleagues in music, the applied arts, theater, in lab-based courses, they know the power of practicing together. A good portion of the not prepared and not participating response from learners has to do with how we break up the time that we have with them. Unless our real-time spaces include practice, conversation, something beyond just information presentation, students are less likely to want to be there, whether that's in the classroom or a live Zoom session. Where it's possible, flip your course, provide information that's new when students are on their own, and then use together time for practice. On the top right is an image of a woman with the hand up in the universal gesture for stop or pause, and that's awareness. So Study up on countering invisible oppression, recognizing microaggressions, avoiding generic labeling, and refer inclusively about gender and race and ability. And then tell your students that your space is a welcoming one along those dimensions. We can also save ourselves time by thinking about cultural relevance. There's a word cloud in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen with words like ethics and sincere and honesty and respect and integrity. Consider how interactions are intelligible to non-native speakers. If you have a lot of students whose first language isn't English in your course, or they come from different cultural backgrounds, how to frame difficult class conversations and how to create a shared understanding of academic integrity standards. I work with a lot of students who don't yet understand or come from models of this is your original work. In fact, I work with an awful lot of students from other cultural backgrounds than in North America, where saying back exactly what the teacher told you is a respectful way to do your essays, or copying things exactly shows how much you've internalized and know what's in the textbook, for example. And that takes a good bit of conversation to either undo or reset some of those expectations for behavior. So some of the things that you see as this is dishonest or this is cheating, sometimes those are cultural relevance conversations. And that can save you an awful lot of time in going down the, oh, you're cheating and we have to, file a case kind of stuff. And the last piece is community. On your screen, there's an image of a hand holding a mobile phone, and on the mobile phone are little people on their mobile phones, kind of meta. And when we're thinking about community, being a part of rather than apart from can give first generation college learners, especially, a template for how to be a student in this environment. Did you notice when we started our webinar today, I said, hey, there's a bunch of different ways you all can be here. And I said, put your camera on or off. You can come on the microphone, you can be in the chat, or you can just lurk. Setting up those expectations for what are ordinary behaviors, what's possible here. And, bonus points if you have that conversation with your students at the beginning of your engagement as well. That fights against imposter syndrome. And it also opens up possibilities that some people would think, oh, I shouldn't bother the professor, or I'm going to use valuable time by interrupting. Like I say out loud, hey, please, I am interruptible. We have time. I've made time for that kind of stuff in our conversation today. So those are three great big ideas that if you engage a little bit at a time, you can actually take some work off your plate. So think about those pinch points, right? Where is it that your students read the directions for an activity and then you get the same email 700 times with confusion about part of the directions? Where is it that you give the lecture of your life and then everybody takes the exam and they all get that concept wrong and you end up having to reteach? Or where is it that you're engaged in a lab or a hands-on activity with students and they just kind of don't get it and they want a different kind of explanation, or they ask you, could you say that a different way? Those are all places where things already aren't going the way you planned them. And it's worth stepping aside and taking some small and intentional actions to reduce that anxiety, to lower those barriers, or to give that information in more than one way so that you're not one at a timing it or doing reteaching afterwards. So we've talked about access, assessment, and engagement. And here are those terms on your screen again, along with an image of a concrete statue of a seated Buddha figure in a leafy garden. This isn't your usual seated Buddha figure, though, because this one's typing on a laptop. So, with access, assessment, and engagement as our guiding principles, and then referring back to those big concerns that we started with, what are some specific practices that you see as possibilities for your course prep? What are some questions you still have about any of the connections we've been making together so far? Ideas that you have for collaboration or work in design, or things you're already doing, and we've underlined those as effective or important. I'll cue up 2 minutes of music again, and as always, you can think for yourself, write yourself some notes, or connect with your neighbors, or post something in the chat. Let me post a quick prompt in the chat. What's a big idea that you want to talk about now? And let's put 2 minutes of music on for that. Here comes the music, and I'll pause and let everybody have some time to think and do. All right, that was a little bit of thinking time. And I'd like to see if there's anybody who wanted to come on the microphone and share what's one of these ideas that we've been talking about that might be useful for you, or you're able to ask some questions about it, or you're already doing it.
We will share over here.
Hello, GU folks. Would you introduce tell me your name and what's your question?
So Nicole Barda, and well, we were just talking about, we've been focusing a lot on grading and maybe changing grading. So some of the ideas that came up, big ideas around that. One of the things I would just suggest that I've done before would be setting a lot of peer feedback days with rubrics, having them give each other feedback, and then you don't give feedback until after those days, and they ask you one thing that you're going to give feedback on. So you're trying to reduce your grading by having them use the rubric you've already designed. They give each other peer feedback, which you have to set up. I'll just say it takes a lot of work on the training part, but once you have that down, and then they're only allowed to ask you one thing for you to give feedback on when they submit their work. So one of the things is several people in here are trying the specs grading, where it's like satisfactory or not.
Yep, like
So,
Linda Nilsson.
Yes, and then some faculty are running into issues because students don't want that not yet, because that means more work on their end. So it's a cultural shift that we were just getting to in that 2 minutes, talking about how to help support each other and students, and understanding that shift in grading. So.
Oh, fabulous. Well, let me build on that if I can as well. I love the idea of asking the learners to help each other using a rubric. And I'm going to say something controversial. Many times our students do not know how to give constructive feedback, or they are not expert enough yet to give meaningful and useful feedback. So if you've got a bunch of, junior level and senior level upper class students, they are usually pretty good, or your graduate students, if you say, hey, give each other feedback on this, they have a box to stand on, intellectually speaking. My freshman and sophomore level students sometimes, well, oftentimes don't. How do we reduce our grade load in that case? You do something very similar to, Nicole, what you suggested, and that is to tell your students exactly the things that they're going to be graded on. When's the last time you spent a beautiful Saturday afternoon grading instead of being outdoors with your family, right? That's a recent thing for a lot of us. And it's because I used to fill up, if I was grading with a pen and paper or giving feedback in my learning management system, I used to look at every tiny little thing. Even on the first few activities that my students did, I was checking their grammar and did they have a thesis and evidence and details to support it, and all the bits and pieces. What I discovered was by giving my students comprehensive feedback on every activity, I was actually overloading them, and they didn't know what to pay attention to or what to start with when they made changes. They were just being overwhelmed by, oh, Dr. Tobin gave me 17 things I need to change. What do I do? So what I've done is I've said, all right, I'm going to ignore most of this, and I'm just going to give you feedback on these two things now. And then if you want feedback on something else, tell me. Right. So along the lines of what Nicole is talking about, tell your students, I'm going to grade you on this now. And you have the opportunity to ask, what's one element of your work that you want my specific feedback on, and I'll do that for you. And that has reduced my grading load by a lot. The second piece that we can talk about there is we have created a culture where every tiny little action that students do has a number or a letter grade associated with it. And you know how students don't do optional, and they, is it on the test? Is there a grade for this? They have had a K-12 experience that has turned them into grade zombies. It's like, I need another number to tell me that I'm doing well. And so the challenge for us is, how do we get students to do things that don't have grades on them, that are just, hey, thank you for turning that in, and I'll let you know if you're on the right track. And Carolyn says, this is my soapbox. Well, join me on it. That's awesome. How do we get students to do those things? We can do something as simple as saying, okay, there's readings in the course, and you're going to give a response to those readings. Those readings responses will not be graded. There's 12 of them. And if you do 11 of them, you'll get 5% of your final grade. It's just check yes or check no for that content, but it's also worth some course credit. So you're reducing your own individual grading load, but you're also skimming through what the students are doing to see, do they get it? Should I say something about this in class? Do we need to go back and review? So cool deal. Thank you for the ideas there. And Knox has a different comment in the chat. He says, I'm comfortable in writing and I'm introverted in person. And so with Zoom, this works fine because there's the chat feature. How do we accommodate our more introverted students in a live in-person lecture? Ask the students to actually have some time to write things down. These music cues that I'm using, that's basically to get me to be quiet and give you time to actually do something. And so if you have a music cue for your students in a live lecture experience or a classroom or a lab, say, I'd like you to stop for a moment and actually take out a pen or your laptop and write something down, and then give that in through Padlet or through Poll Everywhere or what have you. So those are a bunch of different ways that we can use those elements of the class design to make more people feel like they are a part of. And thank you, by the way, Knox, for a good vote for that as well. And Carolyn's talking about how she, in her feedback, will build off how students did in the first assignment versus this last one. So knowing how to schedule and scaffold is an important piece. These are fabulous ideas, and let's wrap up our conversation with 3 bonus ideas. So now on your screen is an image of a man standing in a box, on a box in an outdoor space, holding a microphone as he's talking to an audience. This is Bug House Square in Chicago, where anyone can stand up and speak to the public about any topic. My hope is that during our session just now, and in the remainder of the session well, there is only one more session for the conference, that you'll gain at least one way you can be a secret, sneaky evangelist for inclusive learning or another way to lower barriers for learners. I'd like to offer 3 of them to wrap up our session today. The first one is the power of defaults. It's a key to taking work off your plate. Materials and interactions that are created inclusively from the beginning. On the screen is a dialog box in a learning management system that just warns alternative text field is required for an image that's being uploaded. Reminding people, training people, pleading with them to remember to practice inclusive techniques consistently. These are all doomed to be ever only partial solutions to a challenge that requires near perfect adoption if it's going to be effective. There are already whole shelves worth of legal requirements related to making material accessible, and yet colleges and universities continue to be sued for inaccessible content. So rather than trust that everyone is going to do the right thing, assign resources to create systems that just require good practices, like that required alt text field on the screen, or a workflow in your media services area that requires the staff to create captions for all video content produced through that office. This helps to normalize the work of making engagement, representation, and action choices. It moves accessibility and inclusion from, oh, that's extra effort, to this is part of our everyday tasks. The second one, the smiling academic advisor on your screen who's meeting with a graduate student and pointing out career options on her computer screen, is an example of lowering access barriers beyond the classroom and formal teaching and learning interactions. Now, the accessible things we're talking about had their beginnings in the classroom. And it's a way of lowering barriers across various learning interactions in which our campuses engage. And there's a lot of learning interactions happening in spaces far beyond the classroom, the lab, and the lecture hall. Your advisors are teaching students how to navigate the systems of your college or university. Your tutoring staff are teaching study skills. Your librarians are teaching how to assess and work with information. Your mental health counselors are teaching coping strategies. Wherever students interact with support services, think of how they are teaching and learning engagements. If students are learning something, even if it's not part of the academic curriculum, we can lower barriers, increase engagement, and support their voice, choice, and agency. And the last one, campus-wide, we should commit to core applications to be implemented along with milestones for measuring success. At Kennesaw State University, Jordan Cameron came up with the basic 4. Image alt text, everybody does it. There's an image of Meryl Streep with a big false mustache. Chose that for no reason, right? Basic document formatting using semantic structure and descriptive links. Carolyn's giving a shout out for being an advisor as part of the TRIO support services as well. So she knows that it's not just in the classroom that these kinds of access barriers exist. Same thing with video captions and transcripts, and choosing accessible third-party resources. Get things tested when you buy them and make sure that they are accessible. So let's wrap it up here. On the screen is a photo I took when I was grocery shopping outside of Chicago some years back. It's wintertime, there's snow and slush on the ground, and we're in a parking lot with cars in it. And the focus of the image is an accessible parking spot that has the shopping cart corral in the parking spot, making it impossible for anyone who needs the accessible spot to actually use it. Now, I took out my mobile phone. I snapped that picture. I went to social media, dear at name of grocery store. I'm at your River Forest, Illinois location. And then all caps, not cool. And I hit send. 5 minutes later, a message buzzed in my pocket. It was corporate, indeed not cool. We're calling the store manager right now. I did a little victory dance right there in the aisle with the vegetables. I was like, I did something good for the universe today. And when I had finished my shopping, someone was parked in the accessible spot. They had the hang tag with the little, disability sign on it. But my joy was short-lived because the store staff had just moved the corral over into the striped part of the pavement. So that person parked there couldn't open their doors all the way. What's my point? If we aim for perfection, if we aim to lower every barrier, we'll see the enormity of the tasks that stand before us. We'll suffer from analysis paralysis, and we won't even start. I'll take progress over perfection any day. Define one barrier, work on one activity, expand one assignment or interaction, take one action, then come back and do something different. But don't try to do everything all at once. Let's wrap up with some takeaways. This is a table laden with food: tortilla chips, guacamole, salsa, roasted corn, a liter margarita in a jar. This is takeaway food. What will you take away from our session? What's one big thing? I won't put any music on. We'll just do this lightning round. What's your one big thing in our session today? And let me put that in the chat. What's your one big takeaway? And if you like, just open up your microphone and shout it out or put it into the chat. What's your one big takeaway from our session today? Carolyn says, I love the idea we can allow our students to choose how they engage with content by offering it in multiple ways and then being flexible in how they demonstrate that knowledge. Nicole and our GC folks say progress, not perfection, is the best reminder. Awesome. I appreciate that you're picking up on that last idea. Fantastic. And we're right here at time. So I'll just say thanks a bunch. On the screen is a big thank you. And I speak and consult on this and lots of other ideas. So if you're looking for me, I'd love to continue the conversation at thomasjtobin.com. You can find out how to get in touch with me. I'll say thank you very much for Bob for inviting me. And we're almost done with the conference. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Bob, thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And folks, stay around, please, for the last session coming up. So, Tom, as always, you provide all kinds of really great practical information. That's what I look for. Thank you.
Awesome. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. And I hope our paths will continue to cross. Take care. We'll see you soon.